There's been a significant rise in the number of people becoming victims of modern slavery in recent years, and a new study published in London on Wednesday showed this. An estimated 50 million people were living in situations of modern slavery in 2021, according to the Global Slavery Index. This represents an increase of 10 million people since the previous estimate 5 years before. Now, on the line to discuss this, we've got Brian Kraft, Principal Consultant, Human Rights at Ndevr Environmental, a climate change and human rights advisory firm. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Bill. Pleasure.
Thank you. Now, mate, what exactly is modern slavery?
Yeah, it's a bit of an umbrella term, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really used to describe kind of any form of forced labor or kind of indentured work that where a person is not able to willfully leave. That's the easiest way I like to think about it. Is when somebody is in a working situation, but they cannot willfully or safely leave that situation. That is a very strong indicator that they are in.
So where is slavery most common?
All over the world. It's really a intractable problem. It's in every single country, including here in Australia, including the United States, everywhere. But it does most appear in Asia and the Pacific, but it really is everywhere.
And it's not just forced labour, is it, but forced marriage? That's also a big problem, isn't it?
It's a huge problem. That's right. Yeah, there's so many instances of child forced marriage. And in fact, I think the numbers are probably very underestimated. The new report that you referenced has about 22 million people being forced into marriage. But those numbers are very, very conservative, considering how many children are actually driven into marriage. And it's hard to sort of say that, it's their own free will. It's a sad one.
So what kind of increases are we looking at compared to the last global slavery index in 2018?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, it's the 10 million more humans living in slavery. When you look at it across the whole globe, which is absolutely astronomical. I mean, if you think about it, that means that now we're basically 1 in every 160 people on Earth are a slave right now in 2023. It's really just it's just not okay. It's not acceptable. And when you look, by country by country now, rather than at a globe, there's also some really interesting changes that have happened from the data that we
like what
to now. Well, Australia is one of the big ones that stands out for me. Australia, despite all of our efforts with the Modern Slavery Act and having a fairly robust counter-slavery response, we've increased to 41,000 people in slavery from 15,000 in a span of about 5 years.
Mate, what are they doing? What are they doing?
Yeah, it's very, very hard to know. One thing is, I think the estimates are getting better. So I think some of the increase is probably due to better surveying and better estimates.
But what slavery is going on here?
Oh, it's many things. But onshore, Australia deals with a lot of issues of domestic slavery. So people in domestic servitude. So they might be home care workers or aged care workers, but their passports are taken, or they are coerced or, forced psychologically to remain in situations that they don't want to be in. Sex trafficking is another really big one here. And a lot of really sticky
Mate, a lot of this would be a real surprise to my listeners. A lot of them would be surprised. This is why I'm asking. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a real sobering reality. But I don't want to point the finger only at Australia. I mean, there's some other really shocking and sobering problems. I mean, the United States, for example, went up by almost 700,000 slaves in 5 years to be one of the world's countries with over 1 million estimated people in slavery. So that's the United States. You think that a developed country, the biggest economy in the world. Well, these problems are rife there as well. So we're not pointing the finger only at Australia here. We're pointing the finger really at every single country on earth, saying that we all need to do more when it comes to how we do business and how we live our lives.
So in 2018, Australia legislated to force companies to report on forced labour in their supply chains. How effective has this been?
Yeah, it's been extremely effective at raising awareness about this issue. I mean, Bill, not that many people were really aware that this was a global epidemic, if you will, back in 2018 in this region. It was really just kind of a few niche human rights people yelling about it. But now the Act has done such a good job. Corporations across Australia, they really understand that this is something they cannot ignore, and that it really is a big problem.
So what role can Australian business play in what it does to eradicate these numbers?
Yeah, so a lot of what they can do is, the easiest one is transparency. So to really focus on increasing transparency in the things that they're purchasing and selling. So, a lot of companies are sort of just looking at their first tier supply chain, which is typically only here in Australia. And they say, looks pretty clean, pretty safe. But the reality is we know that these supply chains link all over the world and become very complex and very risky. So, yeah, it's really important for companies to focus.
So what products should we be aware of? Like you're talking about products that are sold on shelves and that, or in companies on shops that might have slavery involved in it. What sorts of stuff are we looking at? Are we looking at rare metals and where kids are used in Africa to mine for things and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the rare metal one is how electronics are flagged as such a high risk by the Global Slavery Index and the UN as well. So electronics, all those fast kind of electrical products that we love and use and have all over our house, those can be very high risk because of the cobalt and the lithium and all of the rare earth metals in them. But it's not just electronics. We should also be wary and ask and inquire and look to see where our clothing comes from, where our chocolate comes from, where our solar panels are coming from.
Yes, solar panels. What can you tell us? Because that surprised me. The world's renewable energy supply chains. What's the danger in there?
Yeah, this is a real moral dilemma that we're facing because, from a human rights perspective, we need to transition our energy system so that we can avoid the worst forms of climate change because, the poorest people on earth are going to suffer the most when the world warms up. And so we're racing to try to make this transition, but we're racing so fast that we're also compromising ourselves from a human rights perspective in solar panel supply chains and battery supply chains. And it goes back to what you said, the rare earth coming out of, certain small mines that have a lot of forced or child labor in them. It comes down to, the processing going on in Xinjiang Autonomous Region in China. It's
where they're dug up in the ground and then where they're processed.
And where they're manufactured. So it's really throughout the supply chain. There are risks from the minerals to the processing to the manufacturing. Yeah, it's a big challenge.
How do we make sure, mate? That the products we get are clean, if you get what I mean?
Yeah. So, I mean, the reality of it is I think we all just need to be a little bit more willing to pay a little bit more for the products that that we need for the energy transition and just for our electronics and things like that, because the transparency actually costs money, and being able to sort of prove that there is no instances of forced labor in a product's supply chain is challenging, and there needs to be a financial incentive there. So we're seeing this play out in the United States, which has banned imports of products that use slavery. And all these companies, including solar power companies, are having to prove that their product doesn't have any slavery in it. And it's arduous and expensive for them, and it means that those solar panels cost more. We need to be willing to pay a little bit more.
So worldwide, what should governments be doing to eradicate modern slavery?
They should be developing increasingly robust legislation. Australia just this week released a very compelling review of its Modern Slavery Act that produces 30 recommendations for how to strengthen it. And one of the strongest recommendations in there is better due diligence in your supply chain. And we're seeing this all across Europe as well. Really good human rights due diligence baked into legislation. I think that's really the best mechanism that governments have to compel organizations to increase transparency and clean up supply chain.
Brian Kraft, Principal Consultant, Human Rights at Ndevr Environmental. Thank you, mate, and God bless you. Thank you so much for your time tonight. You've woken us up. Thank you.